They were the kids who came home to quiet houses, with a key around their neck and no one waiting at the door. They made cereal for dinner, did homework under fluorescent kitchen lights, and learned early that needing help could feel like weakness. They grew up with static on the television, recession in the headlines, divorce in the neighborhood, and adults too busy to explain the fear. So they adapted. They became independent, skeptical, funny, and tough, because that was how you survived being overlooked. But now, those same kids are in their 50s, sitting in cars after work, staring at bills they cannot outrun. Their parents need care, their children need support, their jobs feel less secure, and retirement keeps moving farther away. For decades, Gen X was told to handle it, laugh it off, and never make a scene. But silence has a cost. And across modern America, the forgotten generation is beginning to ask a dangerous question: what happens when the people who held everything together finally rise up? When America talks about generations, it usually chooses two sides of the room. On one side, there are boomers, blamed, studied, defended, and debated like they own the whole story. On the other side, there are millennials and Gen Z, analyzed as the future of work, culture, and politics. But standing between them is Gen X, the generation people mention only when they need a punchline about sarcasm, grunge, or old movies. They are not young enough to be treated as tomorrow. They are not old enough to be treated as history. And because they were smaller, quieter, and less demanding, America learned to look right past them. But looking past Gen X means missing the people currently holding the middle of American life together. They are managers, nurses, teachers, truck drivers, small business owners, parents, caregivers, divorced spouses, and exhausted workers trying to stay useful in a country that keeps changing the rules. They understand the analog world because they lived it. They understand the digital world because they had to learn it. They remember when adulthood promised stability, and they are living through the moment that promise collapsed. This is not just a story about nostalgia, it is about the generation America skipped, now standing in the center of its crisis. Before Gen X became the generation holding everything together, they were the children learning how to be alone. They were called the latchkey kids because many of them carried house keys before they were old enough to understand what independence really cost. After school, they walked home to empty rooms, ringing phones, frozen dinners, and televisions that filled the silence. No one live streamed their childhood. No one tracked every location, every grade, every feeling, or every small emergency. They figured things out because they had to. They learned how to make food, avoid trouble, hide fear, and act like everything was fine before anyone came home. This made them resourceful. It also made them quiet. While other generations were raised to ask, share, post, and explain, Gen X was trained to shrug. A bad day became a joke. A family problem became none of anyone's business. Fear became sarcasm. Pain became independence, and the world looked at that independence and called it strength. But sometimes, what looks like strength is just a child who stopped expecting anyone to show up. That is the hidden beginning of the Gen X story. Not laziness, not bitterness, not nostalgia, but a generation that learned early how to survive without being seen. Gen X did what America told them to do. They studied, worked, paid taxes, raised families, and tried not to complain. They were promised that if they stayed loyal, stability would be waiting. But the deal changed while they were busy keeping their heads down. Jobs became less secure, pensions faded, homes grew expensive, healthcare turned into a maze of bills, forms, and impossible choices. College became a debt trap, not just for them, but for their children. Then came the crashes, the layoffs, the pandemic, and the slow fear that recovery never reached everyone. Gen X was not careless. They were standing in the middle when the bridge cracked. Too young to cash out. Too old to start over without consequences. And now, after decades of playing by the rules, they are asking why the rules only protected someone else. That question is becoming louder every year. That question is becoming a warning. Then comes the trap almost no one sees. Gen X is not only trying to save themselves. They are standing between two generations that both need them. On one side are aging parents, facing doctor visits, medications, loneliness, and the fear of losing independence. On the other side are children, sometimes grown, sometimes still at home, trying to survive rent, debt, and a future that feels unstable. In the middle is Gen X, answering every call. They drive parents to appointments before work. They send money to adult children after work. They check insurance forms at midnight. They compare pill bottles, grocery receipts, school fees, and retirement accounts on the same tired kitchen table. They smile in meetings the next morning like nothing is happening. This is the sandwich trap. It is not just financial. It is emotional. It is logistical. It is the quiet feeling that everyone has an emergency, and somehow you are the plan. And every choice feels like borrowing from their own future to keep someone else's present from collapsing. But who is planning for Gen X? Who checks on the person doing the checking? Who protects the generation that learned to never ask for protection? And that is why the rise begins here, not with anger, but with exhaustion finally turning into a boundary. So why is Gen X rising now? Because the clock finally became impossible to ignore. For years, they believed they still had time to fix the retirement gap, rebuild savings, and recover from every crisis. But middle age has a way of turning vague worry into math. The mortgage is real. The medical bill is real. The aging parent is real. The adult child who still needs help is real. And the account balance on the screen does not care how hard they worked. At the same time, workplaces are changing faster than loyalty can protect them. Technology moves. Companies restructure. Experience is praised in speeches, then discounted in hiring rooms. Gen X is realizing that silence will not save them. Being useful will not automatically make them secure. And waiting politely for America to notice may cost them the future they have left. So the rise begins with a simple decision: stop disappearing. What is Gen X rising against? Not one enemy, but a system that keeps asking more from people it rarely sees. They are rising against invisibility. Against being treated as the middle child of American history. Against retirement panic that arrives quietly, one account statement at a time. Against a healthcare system that can turn one illness into a financial emergency. Against caregiving expectations that assume someone will always step in, drive, pay, call, and carry. Against workplaces that celebrate experience until experience starts looking expensive. Against algorithms and office cultures that confuse youth with value. Against the pressure to stay calm, stay useful, stay quiet, and never become a problem. For Gen X, the rebellion is not loud at first. It begins in a kitchen, with a bill they refuse to ignore. It begins in a meeting, with a question they finally ask out loud. It begins in a family conversation where "I can handle it" becomes "I need a plan too." They are not trying to take anything from anyone. They are trying to stop disappearing from their own lives. Because being overlooked did not make them free. It made them responsible for problems nobody wanted to name. And now, Gen X is naming them. Invisibility, insecurity, exhaustion, age pressure, broken promises. And once a forgotten generation finds its voice, it becomes much harder to push back into silence. So what does rising up actually look like for Gen X? It does not always look like protest signs or shouting crowds. Sometimes, it looks like a quiet conversation at the kitchen table. It looks like telling an adult child, "I love you, but I cannot rescue you forever." It looks like asking aging parents what care will really cost before the crisis arrives. It looks like checking the retirement account, not with shame, but with urgency. It looks like learning new skills without apologizing for age. It looks like walking into a workplace and refusing to be treated as replaceable. It looks like saying no before resentment turns into collapse. For Gen X, rising up is practical. It is private, it is uncomfortable, but it is powerful, because the generation that learned to survive alone is finally learning something harder. They are learning to ask for help. They are learning to set limits. And most of all, they are learning that being needed is not the same as being safe. In the end, Gen X was never the loudest generation. They were the ones who held the line. They held it through recessions, layoffs, divorces, caregiving, debt, and changing technology. They held it at work. They held it at home. They held it for parents who were aging. They held it for children who were struggling. And too often, they held it while pretending they needed nothing. But no generation can carry a country forever without being seen. Gen X does not need to become louder than everyone else. They do not need to win a war against younger or older Americans. They only need to stop vanishing. To speak before the crisis becomes collapse. To plan before sacrifice becomes self-erasure. To remember that their future still matters. For decades, they survived by staying quiet. But in modern America, silence has become too expensive. And now, the forgotten generation is beginning to rise.